I'm Tom from Do-It-Yourself Home Automation, and this is a review of the Leica Q camera. So this is the camera that I use. I'm a working photojournalist. I've been using this for about 4 years now, and you can see it's kind of beaten up over time, but it's held up really well overall. And I've taken about 500,000 photos on my Leica Q, and these have been published all over in different publications and used all over the internet. So I've really gotten a ton of experience with using this camera. And this is my review and some of my impressions, again, after taking over 500,000 photos on my Leica Q. So first principles, what is the Leica Q? It's a mirrorless camera. It's one of the cameras, in fact, that launched the mirrorless revolution, I would call it, the move away from DSLR cameras to cameras that use a virtual viewfinder and where you are viewing directly through the lens, and there's not all the complexity of mirrors and things that have to come out of the way in order for you to take a photo. So this really launched the genre in a lot of ways, and it's still one of the best mirrorless cameras that you can get. So what's so great about it? A couple of things. It's got a full frame 24 megapixel sensor on the Leica Q, and it still manages to cram that into this camera body. You can see is only 1.4 pounds with the battery. So it's incredibly compact, incredibly small, and easy to carry. I can very simply lift this up with one hand. I can wear it around my neck all day with no problems. So it's very easy to take out into the field, which again, as a photojournalist, I love because I can carry it all day. I never know when I'm going to see something that's relevant to a story, and I'm always ready to take a publication quality photo, full frame sensor, just like you would have in any kind of high-end DSLR if I've got my Leica Q around my neck or in my camera bag. So that's a big advantage, the weight. The other advantage is that what we've got on here is real Leica glass. This is a 28 millimeter prime. And it's a fixed lens on the camera. So there's some trade-offs and some major advantages to having this format and also this setup. The advantage of a prime is that you're going to get extremely good quality. Leica glass is the best in the world, and it's a real Leica lens. It's a Summilux, which again just depends on the aperture setting, which we'll get to in a moment. But 28 millimeter real Leica glass, prime lens, going to have amazing quality, and in fact it does. You get almost no aberration around the side, almost no distortion on the lens. You can shoot into direct sunlight and still get a usable photo without any kind of flare. It's a pretty incredible piece of glass, and again, because it is a prime, it's pretty compact, and again, it's easy to carry around. The only downside with that is there's no zoom. So this is a camera where you zoom with your feet, I like to say. So if you want to get closer to an object or something you're photographing, you're going to walk there, which is fine. It's just something you have to adapt to. Also, 28 millimeter is a fairly wide angle lens. So a lot of people get used to a 35 millimeter, which is again sort of the standard lens for a lot of cameras that people would have used. 28 millimeter is almost more like a cell phone. So it's got a much wider angle. It's not as wide as a true wide angle lens, like an 18. But at a 28 millimeter, you're going to get a lot more in the frame than you would with a 35 millimeter. And there's some advantages and disadvantages to that. If you're used to working in 35 millimeter, it might feel unfamiliar, but it works great for capturing a broader scene with more context, or for capturing architecture, for capturing landscapes where you want to be able to get more into the shot. 28 millimeter, a little bit challenging at first to work with, but I found it to be a really great format and a great compromise in terms of being able to capture these very sort of atmospheric images, and also images that look very kind of comfortable and normal on a social media setting where people are used to seeing photos in that format, even if they're not aware of it. Other great advantages with this lens: it has a super fast autofocus, so it's not like the M where you have to do a manual rangefinder focus. This does have a full autofocus, so I can click the lens over to that setting. I can also click this off on the bottom here with one hand, and then I'm able to go through here and actually change to manual focus. And there's focusing aids in the viewfinder, which again we'll get to in a minute, and I can click it back over into autofocus when I'm ready to go back to that. We also have aperture settings that are broken out, so you can go into a automatic setting here, and let the camera choose your aperture for you based on the light meter. If you leave this on automatic and change the shutter speed dial, which again we'll talk about, over to a different setting, then it goes into shutter priority mode. You can have full auto by putting both of them on A, or you can keep the shutter speed here on auto and switch this over, and you're in aperture priority mode, where you can choose an aperture and it'll choose the appropriate shutter speed to capture a good exposure with that. Another thing to keep in mind here is that this does have a physical lens cap. We grab that, so it just sits on the front of the camera here, and it's actually so beautifully, perfectly machined that it doesn't screw on. It literally just pops off, and it's felt on the other side. The tolerances are so good that it'll stay on perfectly, and then when you're ready to shoot, you simply pop it off. Again, I've been using this for over 4 years, and this has held up, and it's not loose or anything over time. So that's, again, a testament to the quality of Leica's build. The camera body itself is magnesium, so it's incredibly light as well and just very strong. You can see I've probably dropped this 50 times. I've smashed it against boulders, climbing with it and that kind of thing. I've walked all around the streets of cities all over the world with this. And, I've got some dings and some dents, but overall the body has held up incredibly well over 4 years of use in a professional context in the field. 2 settings here. We've got the individual frames, single frame where every time you press the shutter button, you're going to take one shot, or a continuous shooting mode where you can do sort of a rapid fire. It's not as fast as some of the SLRs or DSLRs out there at this point, but you can still switch to that C mode and take continuous shots. I usually shoot in the S mode. I'm really framing my shots, thinking more about them, but if you want to capture action, switch it over to C. It does work well for that. Again, shutter speed here, I usually leave mine on the automatic mode, but if I want to dial down, for example, and I want to go to a slower shutter speed, if I'm on a tripod, I can even do like a 1-second exposure to do a long exposure at night, or if I want to bump things up and do a faster shot and force a higher shutter speed, even in lower light settings, so that I can capture action, I can bump it up to a 250 or 125, or even faster if I feel I have enough light to do that. It will choose the ISO setting for you, depending on your shutter and aperture combination. It starts at 100 ISO, and it goes all the way up to, depending on your firmware, at least 12,500, and with a firmware update up to 24,000. So it's fairly light sensitive. You will get some noise at those higher ISOs, but it's generally, it does hold up really, really well. Other functions we have here, there's a video button. You can take video with it. It's probably not the camera's strong point. You are shooting through that beautiful Leica glass, but it's just not really optimized for that. You can shoot HD video there, though, if you need to. It's helpful sometimes if you're out in the field and you see something where you feel like I really need a video of that. Switch into that mode. At least you do have that option. And again, the firmware updates do improve that over time. You have a hot shoe on the top. This is a separate little thumb holder that I got that goes in there, but you can also put a flash in there, or any other kind of, whatever else you want to put into the hot shoe on the top. I like this because it makes it easier to use the camera one-handed, which I'm often doing, again, as a photojournalist out in the field. You have diopter correction, so if you use glasses, you can adjust that, and you have this really, really good electronic viewfinder. So the downside of a mirrorless camera, you're not looking through the lens. You need to have a good electronic viewfinder, and the Leica Q has probably the best one I've ever seen. It almost looks 3D when you look through it. I think it's 1.3 megapixels, but it's crammed into this tiny, tiny size. So I really think it looks as good, if not better, than when you're looking through the lens on an actual DSLR. And again, with it, you can get all of the settings, because it's a screen. You can see all of your settings broken out on there on the screen. So it makes it easier to choose your shutter speed, choose your aperture, whatever you want to be doing. Another function I love, there's a macro mode, so I can turn this dial down here. It's a little hard for me to do this one-handed. switch into macro mode, then you can shoot at a very, very close in kind of setting. So you can see here up to about 6 inches, a little bit more than 6 inches. And you saw that very slick movement here. This is very Leica. When you switch from macro to a standard shooting mode, the scale actually changes on the lens. So if you want to go into a manual focus, your focusing scale changes there so that you can do macro shots. And it takes beautiful macro shots. So if you want to do close-up photos of food or anything like that, then it's extremely useful to have that macro mode, and it does a really great job with it. The other thing I love here is that you can see the widest aperture is an f1.7. So that's a really good, really fast lens. It's you can definitely go on an M. You can go down to 0.95 if you have Noctilux lens, but this puts this into Leica's Summilux category, and it is incredibly fast. So you get great light sensitivity with that. You can shoot almost into complete darkness without having to bump the ISO up too much, and you can lock focus really readily because it is getting a ton of light. I usually shoot either wide open or at a slightly stopped down aperture. You can go all the way up to an f16 if you want to. I usually shoot around usually an f2.8 to an f5.6, or if I'm shooting in low light or I want to get really beautiful bokeh around a subject, like for a portrait, or I want to blur the background when I'm doing a food shot, I can go all the way down to f1.7. And that's another advantage in addition to the light sensitivity you get there, is you can get really amazing bokeh with this camera. Again, you can shift it into the automatic aperture. I would really recommend keeping the shutter in automatic and then adjusting the aperture to achieve that look, because it is something that I think is really distinctive to the camera. Let's take a look. We've got the screen on the back here. You can disable that if you want to. You have a variety of different focus modes here, so I can go into the menu. You can change focus. You can do a single point focus. You can do a multi-point focus. You can also do a face recognition focus. So I've got it in single point now, or a tracking focus where it tracks a particular object. There's also the touch autofocus where you can actually touch this touch screen to choose a focus point. So you have a lot of different options. I usually use one point if I'm shooting an object like in a studio setting, or a multi-point if I'm out in the field. Face detection can be nice for street photography because it'll find a person and lock in, but I find it slows the shot down just a little bit. Quick note, this says Leica camera, Wetzlar, Germany. This is in fact made in Germany, so this is not a Leica camera that is a rebrand of somebody else's product. This is a legit Leica made by Leica in Wetzlar. If you run into problems with it, you can send the camera back to Wetzlar and they will service it. So I like to send mine in to get serviced about once a year. You will sometimes get, even though it is a fixed lens, you will sometimes get some dust on the sensor. That'll start to manifest if you shoot against a bright sky, for example, and you're in an f16. You'll see some dust spots. When that happens, you can send the camera in, and Leica will service it for you and send it back. Usually takes about a month. They do a great job. So it's really easy to correct that over time, which is great. You can scroll through photos that you've taken, just like any functions you would have on any kind of a digital camera. This will automatically switch to the EVF if you put this up to your eye, which is a nice function, or if you move your hand away, then you're going to go back to the settings on here on the back. You can customize the ISO if you want to. It's a little hard to see what I'm really focusing on here, but you can customize the ISO if you want to lock in a particular value. I like to keep it on auto, let it automatically choose for me. But you can see I can go all the way up to, in this case, actually, I have a firmware that lets me go to 50,000, so it goes quite high. I usually set a ceiling on mine. There's settings in the app, in the menu here, where you can change your maximum value. So I like to lock it in, I think, at 24,000. But you can see it's pretty light sensitive, even without a ton of light here. I'm only at about a 320 ISO. I'm at a 1/125th shutter speed. You can also set a minimum or maximum shutter speed. So I like to be able to freeze the action because, again, I'm often walking around with this. And then you've got this multifunction button on the side. So depending on where you are, since I'm at a single point focus, I can change my focus point if I'm not right in the center of the frame. And I can also change what I see in terms of the menu. So if I want a totally clear menu, or if I want to see some of my information here, Um, you can also do really readily, you can do focus and exposure compensation. So I have this click wheel up here, which is customizable, set for my exposure compensation, so I can bump it up a stop or two if I want to, bump it down, have some manual control. Can also change this multifunction wheel in the menus to do basically any of the settings that you want to have on there. You also get this one additional multifunction button. I use it for a crop frame, so if I want to go from the 28 millimeter and I want to simulate a 35 millimeter, it will actually take the picture, full frame picture, and then it'll create a separate JPEG for me that's cropped to either that 35 or 50 format. Because you have 24 megapixels, it's usually a good enough quality that you can still use that photo, but it is still capturing in the RAW format the whole frame, so you can always change those crop points later. But it's nice for framing if you want to do like a portrait and you want to choose the exact 50 or 35 millimeter equivalent and lock that in there. Overall, the picture quality is absolutely amazing. Again, that Leica glass, really great f1.7 there, the prime lens going into that full frame sensor. It has the Leica look, which if you know Leicas, you'll appreciate. Just has this quality that's hard to describe. And again, I've used this for hundreds of thousands of photos, and it is definitely the best camera that I've owned. I absolutely love it. It's certainly the best digital camera. And I think it just does an incredible job. So if you're using this for, vacation snapshots, and that kind of thing, it's great. It's light, it's easy to carry around. One consideration, it's not weather sealed, so don't take it out in the rain. It's a little hard to take to a beach. You just do have to protect it, but a great camera for that kind of use, capturing, day-to-day life and just incredible quality. One thing I would recommend is to pair it with some kind of software to develop the raw photos that you get from it. The RAWs that come out of it are relatively flat because again, it is a professional camera, so they're trying to set it up so that you can use your own editing setup. So if you get the JPEGs out of it, you can do RAW and JPEG if you want. They will look a little bit flat, so I recommend shooting in RAW and then using software to develop those RAWs, and you'll get the best quality out of the camera by doing that. If you are a professional, I can tell you as another professional that this is an incredible camera for photojournalism, for sort of event work, if you're not doing a ton of portraits, if you want to get more of a photojournalistic look to the shots that you're taking, and also just a great travel camera if you do travel work. And a great camera for walking around with because it is so light. It's inconspicuous. You're not going to cause your subjects a lot of concern with having this giant DSLR. It's just a very intuitive, very easy to carry camera. And those are a lot of the reasons why I love my Leica Q.